académico correspondiente de la Academia Mexicana de Ciencias. El doctor Alper nos va a hablar en su conferencia que se titula el modelado, el desarrollo de un país a través de la innovación, de las responsabilidades que en el ámbito de la innovación tienen los sectores público, privado, académico, y cuál es esa interacción deseable para que se pueda dar la innovación en los países que pretenden, mediante el conocimiento, tener un rápido y mejor desarrollo. Muy bienvenido, doctor Alper, a México, y pues el micrófono es suyo.
Gracias, Sergio, for the very nice introduction. It's a privilege to be here today at the Mexican Academy of Science annual meeting on science and the humanities. Bringing together people from a broad range of disciplines, be they philosophers, sociologists, even chemists like myself, with biomedical researchers and others, is a wonderful opportunity to not only talk to each other, but on occasion come up with new ideas and reach the feeling on both parts or many parts to work together on issues of substance and potential significance. It's also a pleasure, as Sergio Alcácer mentioned, to be a corresponding member of this academy. This academy does excellent work in a wide variety of areas, from school education to educating and informing decision makers in the nation. Today, what I would like to do, and I know for many or all of us, you've had a long day, but if I could keep you engaged for another 40 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about the roles and responsibilities of different actors or stakeholders in terms of innovation, science, technology to benefit society. Mainly the private sector, that is companies, firms, the public sector, governments at different levels, and of course academic institutions. On this slide is described the objectives to create national innovation, science, technology gems. Before I go into it, let me be very clear. When I say science, it means all of research. I used to bring young scientists to the World Economic Forum. And some of my business colleagues were surprised that they included philosophers, the chair of economics of Technical University of Berlin, as well as the classic definition of a scientist. So we're talking about the complete portfolio of research, including science and technology. So these objectives are to create an ecosystem to encourage innovation S&T, to ultimately impact economic development and societal well-being, and to enhance the quality of life within a nation. To get there, we need national innovation strategies, and these need to be developed with strong consensus support, meaning the industry, academia, and government need to work together to chart out the future of the country in terms of research and innovation. And as noted at the bottom, a strategy is only a strategy by itself. A strategy without implementation and with resources, financial and human resources, is a hallucination. When strategy is implemented, there's the clear understanding there will be investments made by different organizations. Those implementation of these strategies and the various initiatives and programs need to be held accountable, not only in a financial sense, but in terms of meeting the objectives that were set out in the plan. So what I'd like to do first is talk briefly about the roles and responsibility of different sectors. Industry, private sector, has a major role to play to do research and innovation within the company, because that's a vehicle to discover, invent, next generation, next stage products, processes, and technology. That will assure the future well-being of those firms, those companies. And they can also build on existing knowledge in commercial entities. Incremental innovation versus disruptive innovation. It's not versus, it's both. And companies will do this driven by the need to be highly competitive on a global basis. What I noticed personally from my experience in different sectors, in the industry sector, is firms, companies need to know what questions to ask. If you don't know what questions to ask, you're unlikely to pursue research in an assertive manner within the company, because that's a risk not worth taking. So senior managers of firms need to be well prepared for the role they play within the company to run research and innovation. That's true for large companies, medium companies, small companies, startups, and those with less than, let's say, 50 or even 100 employees, are not in a position generally to undertake much research because they're in survival mode. They're always seeking additional funding for their research to get to the next stage, the so-called venture capital support or angel investment. And ultimately, they need to commercialize whatever new thing they have, a new drug, a new material, and so on. But some do research, and they can still gain advantage in different ways, which I'm going to describe, especially working with university researchers. Let me mention Canada in terms of several things. First, Canada and its education system, I think, is well regarded globally as one of the best. It doesn't matter what school you go to anywhere in the country, kindergarten to grade 12, the quality of education will be uniformly very good or excellent. Canada has figured out a system that is not totally dependent on income and taxes within particular districts. Second, in terms of research impact, significance, and output, it ranks 4th in the world. So it is doing very well. It can do even better. But it's uncorrected for size. We're a very small population, 34, 35. But we have challenges. Mexico has challenges. The United States has some challenges. So does Canada. Canada, I believe Mexico, both share the underperformance in terms of business investment expenditure in research and development. In fact, in Canada, it's very worrying because between 2006 and 2013, that is 7 or 8 years, it's declined by $1 billion. How much business industry spends. And if you recognize that in terms of GDP, gross domestic product expenditures, for the industrialized world, the average is roughly 2 to 1 spent by industry and government. Industry is the major player, more than government. So here, our ranking has declined from 18 to 26 in the last 10 years. And I'll give you a rationale as to the major reason why that is so, and an optimistic view for the future. Where we do rather well, not outstanding, is in industry or business university partnerships, where we're 8th in the world. Mexico's 29. And so both countries need to improve at different paces. And my presentation is going to focus in a few minutes on how you build excellent business university partnerships. Because that's a leverage to industry doing more research, universities also understanding and valuing what it does that could be useful to industry. It may be very basic research. Personally, in my career, I've done basic research. Some of it has led to commercialization. That's a nice fringe benefit, but that was not the intention of the research. So you can do outstanding fundamental research and impact industry and society. Government has a role in supporting research in industry. And there are effectively 2 ways. There are more, but 2 dominant ways. One is what's called indirect support, better known as tax credits. In some countries called scientific research and development tax credits. And it's particularly helpful to small companies, less so to medium and large. However, it is quantity driven, not quality. So what happens is a company puts in a request for tax credit for the research that that company has performed. Nobody looks at the quality. Nobody assesses. It's just numbers. Canada has been one of the world's leaders for over a generation in indirect support, ranked anywhere from 1, usually 1 up to 3 years ago, to 4. Spends now $3.6 billion a year. But these expenditures, when you look at the impact, have had very little impact on the purpose of those expenditures from the government perspective, and that was to enhance research in the company. On the other hand, consultants who prepare the documentation for the company to get its tax credit are major beneficiaries. Never forget. The other, of course, would be direct support. This is not a handout by the government. These are through peer-adjudicated grants, just like many of you here, the majority are from academia, and have to apply for grants on a peer adjudication basis. So it is quality-driven, in contrast to indirect support, and with a focus on excellence. Examples in the US, DARPA, Defense Agency, a research program, also the Department of Energy has a program, EARPA, and there are others. And in Canada, Two examples are Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC, and the Industrial Research Program, Assistance Program. They're excellent, but small in magnitude. And Canada's direct support to industry is near the bottom of the OECD. The OECD average in terms of direct to indirect support by government is 2-to-1. And that's where the Nordic countries are, Norway, Sweden, and the others. The United States is 4-to-1. Canada is 1 to 6.8. That's an enormous thing. And it's the contention of the Science, Technology, Innovation Council, which I had the privilege to chair for almost exactly 8 years, that the low level of direct support handicaps the competitiveness of Canadian business. And so government taking that advice and adjusting the direct to indirect ratio, maybe not to 2-to-1, but certainly a little more favorable towards direct support, will have a significant impact in enhancing research and industry. Governments have the primary responsibility for supporting basic research and research general in academia. And it was a long time ago, in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, an engineer, Vannevar Bush, provided a report to the US president called The Endless Frontier. And he really made a very compelling case why government should provide strong support for research. He was the one who nurtured the creation of what's now, since shortly after he advocated it, the National Science Foundation. So that's been, I think, well accepted in most jurisdictions. And while industry and others, even and philanthropists, make financial investment in university research, they invest in other things, undergraduate education and so on. The government has the overarching responsibility to support research and innovation in colleges and universities. Let's now look to the issue of business-university partnerships. Well, there are two reasons and two ways that companies are interested in working with universities. There are more that you will see. But I'm telling you from their perspective. If I'm the president of a company, why would I engage in research with universities? You can do it in an offensive way or in a defensive strategy. Offensive means to have academics undertake new research for the companies, to benefit the company's R&D portfolio as well as the researcher at the university, the faculty members, students, postdoctoral, leading to new inventions in the field. That's the minority position. The majority is as a defensive measure, to build fences around existing patents through work done by faculty. They have no clue whether they're working in an offensive or defensive mode, with few exceptions unless the company tells them. But sitting on boards over the years of some major entities in the United States and other countries, those are the two approaches from the corporate perspective. So first, let's look at the reasons acknowledging the business outlook, let's look at the reasons why business and why universities want to engage in collaboration. First, to seek out the best people in the world, irrespective of location, to collaborate with them on one or another subject. Big companies may have staff who do nothing else but look for such people at different institutions. In 1982, one day, I got a call from British Petroleum in the UK saying, "Are you still doing research in this area?" I said, "Yes. We'd like to come and talk with you," which they did. And that led to a 15 years of support from British Petroleum on research where my group and I had almost 100% flexibility in terms of what we did. It was only the several themes that we negotiated agreement, but beyond that, it was a remarkable relationship that led to 32 patents. And more important than any patent, educated and informed my students and postdocs, and broadened my perspective, without which I would have never achieved the level of scientific achievement. So working with industry definitely has enormous potential. Second, they look within their networks, and that means using personal relationships to connect to people. Some companies issue challenges, announce, we welcome proposals on such and such. That's especially true in the pharmaceutical industry, but also elsewhere. And attend conferences, so they learn about cutting-edge research as well as bring in people. For the universities, quite a number offer so-called co-op and internship programs to students who go to industry. Some places have programs for 4 months at a time, some a year at a time, some in between. And that builds the relationship with industry and gives the student a feeling of what it's like to work in industry. And that doesn't mean laboratory. It could be in a bank, financial firm, or other, across the board. Universities, it can benefit in terms of developing centers of excellence, which significant support through business university partnership. And some universities have leading researchers from industry come and teach part of a course or all of the course. And that too is beneficial to everyone. So let's now crystallize the reasons why business and university collaborates. First, for the private sector, for industry, it increases your research capacity because it adds value from outside. You can have access to technology and infrastructure, equipment, facilities not available in the company. That is particularly true for small companies, SMEs, but also even big companies. And the number one reason why business collaborates with universities has nothing to do with the research and everything to do with talent, with people. I did a study in the UK, and someone else did one in the US different times, and came to that same conclusion, that the vast majority of business university partnerships are to potentially recruit their next employees, to establish strong relationships. To leverage investment by government support for the project, and I'll talk about that later, so that a $50,000 a year investment by a company can give the university researcher in some places $150,000 a year support total for their research. That's great for the university faculty member and the students, and the company sees this as maximizing the impact in terms of the amount of money invested. It says can be an alternative to companies conducting in-house research. That's true, but that is not, personally, not a desirable goal. Because, as I said earlier, companies need to know what questions to ask. And if they have no familiarity with that, there's an issue. By the way, I once went with a former president of BP to visit 6 companies in Canada because he wanted to work out potential collaboration company to company. And at the end of the visit, I said, so what is your view? And he said 5 of the 6 leaders didn't know what questions to ask. And they're unlikely to collaborate with us, while one was absolutely outstanding. And for companies could support ongoing concurrent internal research. Next, that it ensures universities provide the training that produces the expertise that industry has. Not always, but in many cases. And for the company, when it has a problem in terms of its economic situation and may reduce its staff, it's a buffer between research and the business cycle. To the university community, to the faculty member students, it can increase the relevance of university research. As I noted, provides training for students working on real-world problems, sometimes with industry timelines, but you don't function in an industry timeline within the institution. Provides opportunities for students to work for short periods in a company, increases the awareness in industry for university research, and industry needs to learn that. There are deficiencies on both sides. This is not a one side knows all and the other knows nothing. And of course, generates finance. What are the barriers to collaboration between university and industry? Almost always IP, intellectual property. Different universities have different policies. Many are the same of one type, and then there'll be a number the same of another type, and some are unusual. And negotiating intellectual property rights often takes a long time, and industry has little patience for that and walks away sometimes for agreements. Then there's the difference of opinion between collaborators regarding whose contribution leads to commercial success within the university research group. That has happened. And then the senior management, as a former vice president of research, I can tell you that is the case at too many universities, at least in my country, as recently as 5 to 8 years ago, was unrealistic expectation that money, significant money, will be made. That is, some universities view IP as a concrete way to monetize the impact of knowledge. Several told me it was to help them balance budgets. That's a highly unreliable approach. Regarded as a windfall, and the benefits can be valuable in that regard. Then there's technology transfer offices, and in different countries, there are different capabilities, even in the same country, of course. Some are excellent, some are, as in the second bullet, understaffed, underfunded, and lack competency. And a real problem is they're often perceived as being more focused on making money again than getting technology out the door. There are several universities I've been to recently where the Technology Transfer Office obviously favors big companies over dealing with small, unless it's their own companies that are generating a startup. It's bizarre, but true. And I think educating and informing them is very important on what are the best practices. TTOs want IP negotiations to come to closure at a very, very early stage when there's almost no hope for commercialization. Then the receptor capacity in industry. So in the Canadian case, you saw that we have low receptor capacity and basic knowledge of our company managers. Universities need to do a better job of selling, of conveying the value and interest and importance of fundamental research to businesses, Canadian or Mexican or anyone. And the complicated bureaucracy in universities sometimes does not make it appealing for the private sector to engage with universities. Survey after survey brings that latter point out. But personally, it is improving at the present time. On the other hand, best practices. What are the practices that nurture collaboration, that are likely to make it a success? First, intellectual property management is best considered as a way to promote knowledge sharing rather than as a means to control and limit knowledge flow. It's an issue of open innovation, in a sense, versus closed innovation. For companies, the best practice is free exchange of non-commercial use now and reserve the right to negotiate commercial use later. And additional payments to the licensor if the license is involved if revenues exceed a certain level. For practices in universities, there's a long list here, but I'll just note, simplify and standardize the license and contract process. That's very important. Increase the researcher involvement in disseminating intellectual property. In other words, the researcher, the student, or the postdoc and the faculty member need to be engaged in this process. And operate a liaison program through the Technology Transfer Office with an entry to industry. The best form of knowledge transfer is on 2 feet, each of you. Therefore, postdoctoral programs in the company. A number, especially large companies, have postdoctoral programs in different countries, in Western Europe, in Japan, Korea, US, Canada, Mexico. I don't know to what extent that exists. We mentioned co-op, adjunct professorships held by company researchers. That's been a very effective way of nurturing relationships. Professors hosted by companies, doesn't have to be a sabbatical, it can be very short term, a few days to a week, 2 years. I've had in my laboratory people from different companies in different countries, and my department, chemistry at Ottawa, which has been the top 3 in the country for at least 60 years in a row, one of the top in the world. A surprisingly large number of its faculty have spent at least 1.5 year or a full year sabbatical in industry. And another important feature, I believe, is world-class researchers need to be on a company's board. It's, of course, For companies, they need the business sense and other aspects from financial perspective. But adding value by having researchers on, especially looking, because companies spend so much money on research, a number of large companies, even through 2008 and beyond, Intel, Dow Chemical, and so on. It is crucial that they have a researcher's perspective on the board. So it's gratifying to see more and more companies doing it. And that also builds the relationship between industry and academia. And then best practices and skills development. So graduates of universities need to possess knowledge development and business skills, ideally, to be well equipped with the capacity to be entrepreneurs. The growth of economies in a number of industrialized countries is largely due to entrepreneurs, not only. And so nurturing the entrepreneurship role is important. Universities, in addition to promoting co-ops and so on, should have mentorship programs and commercialization programs for students who are interested in having access to industry. Some universities allow people from industry to take courses without enrolling in degree programs. And that's valuable, as well as to teach courses for people from industry. This keeps your graduates, faculty university, connected to the faculty. It helps a lot fundraising, it helps in many, many ways. Industry also contributes to skills development by, as I already noted, having industry people in university on sabbaticals for a few months to 3 to 6 months. And a recent development in Canada is the increase in the co-designing of curricula, of undergraduate programs. Biopharmaceuticals, one of the integrated undergraduate programs at Ottawa, and another in e-commerce. Biopharmaceuticals, the curriculum committee, in addition to faculty, students, had people from 4 pharmaceutical companies. So they gave their input, their suggestions. Some were accepted, some were not. But that made for excellent decision-making in constructing the curriculum for that integrated program, bringing professors from science, engineering, and medicine to teach in the program. So how do we enable conditions, good conditions for growing collaboration? In addition to the co-op and internship program, be mindful of the innovation aims of industry and university, and look for areas of convergence or compatibility between the two. Identify the positive features, the mutual benefits. Think and recognize the culture in industry as well as your own, those in universities' own culture. It's totally different. But you learn from each other. And now identify the mechanisms for having a vision or common purpose that can benefit both. Enhancing knowledge transfer, I will not go through all of this. Rethink institutions and industry, rethink your approach to IP, and I'm going to give you some groundbreaking advances in recent years on this slide. Pennsylvania State University is not Harvard or MIT, but it's a very fine institution, excellent institution. And it merits credit for being the first to announce about 4 years ago that it no longer mandates ownership of IP associated with industry-funded research. The VP research said, and I'll read it, the real value is not in IP ownership, but in the contact students and faculty have with real problems in the world. The university will explore an entirely new approach which will make Penn State a friendlier environment for industry-sponsored research, knowing that the companies themselves usually bring a considerable amount of their own intellectual property to the project. We're moving to the position where if a corporation sponsors research with us, they own it. We prefer it. We're looking to get the interactions, the relationships, and the ability to work on more pressing. So, quite a number of universities followed suit in different countries. And in Canada, the president of the University of Manitoba, also a very good university, not the number 1 or 2 in the country, adopted an IP policy allowing industry to make use of research with no strings attached until such time as wealth creation happens, until revenue, at which point they will be expected to provide support at 1 or 2% of sales. So this removes short-term payments that are often a barrier to stimulating partnerships. But it's not only academia that's changing to different degrees, but the industry. Some 6 years ago, Dow Chemical Company came out with a very innovative decision, committing $250 million, more than $250 million, over 10 years, about $25 million a year, to support research and education, I underline the latter, at 11 major universities, 10 in the US and Cambridge. And each of those awards included 20%, that is $500,000 a year, as philanthropy for the university leadership in their wisdom to use for the maximum benefit for the institution. That was very forward. So Dow has the IP rights, but it then gives royalties, etc. And I've witnessed the change. I've talked to Dow corporate research in Midland, Michigan, and I've talked to not only the administration, but the young researchers there as well as more experience. And it's changed the mindset of the company and the nature of the relationship with those universities. So both of those developments, both on the academic and industry side, are very beneficial. Just on the last couple of slides, I want to mention the importance of leverage. So in Canada, there are a number of different programs by one or another of the 3 main granting agencies. One is, and I've shown a few here. One is collaborative R&D. And you can read it, but the grants range from $10,000 to $500,000 a year. The minimum cash contribution from the company, let us say it's $50,000, as I mentioned earlier, then the granting agency will give at least $75,000. So the 50 buys 125. Then there are idea to innovation programs or proof of principle or concept, also with matching funds. Do you know, 1982 was the first year of the granting agency, Natural Science Engineering Research Council, where they created a program involving potential and real collaboration with industry. I personally applied for the program, was lucky to be successful. The antagonism by the research community at the beginning was phenomenal. Those of us who were successful were told we were prostituting ourselves to industry, selling out, and so on, even worse. However, to the great credit of my colleagues and others, their attitude changed dramatically within 18 months, and they became boosters for some of the reasons I elaborated this afternoon in a positive sense. So working together, industry, university, is not the panacea for everything. It's just one approach, one prong and a multi-pronged strategy for a researcher at an institution to develop excellent support for his research program, and for a company to gain the benefits that I described. In the last couple of slides, I want to use that as an entry to just ask yourselves to reflect on the question, how do you build a successful society? Research is important, but education, without education, we would never be successful. Having an excellent school education system, kindergarten to grade 12, as well as university, is essential, both education and research. Clean water is essential. Well, access to electricity is important. You know, in Africa, malaria often results from children coming home from school to homes that have only kerosene. They cannot see the Anopheles mosquito at sunset coming in and biting and get malaria. It's horrible. I sit on the board of an initiative called Smart Villages instead of Smart Cities. Access to electricity, off-grid access, that is solar energy and others, which in its short history is already reaping excellent results, practical results as well as basic research. And an excellent public health care system. My country since 1966, 50 years plus, has had the most socialized medical system in the world. And despite exaggerated claims as to its limits and deficiencies, I challenge anyone to come to Canada and see how it works. Of course there are issues. In any country there are issues. But the access to healthcare by any person of any economic status is essential as the access to education. What I find inexcusable is many countries to this day do not provide children with access to education free so they could complete their high school. Because, using the word earlier, handicap, you are handicapping the career development of that individual for life. So, a first-class education system and research, together with effective, honest, and visionary leadership, political leadership, academic leadership, industry leadership, ensures access to these basic needs. And second, this whole entire ecosystem based on excellence and integrity in everything one does is essential. And parents and teachers must take leadership. Yesterday, coincidentally, I had breakfast with a person who is very engaged in Mexican education. We talked about developing stronger parent-teacher relationships. That's very important. And instilling the values of integrity and honesty and leadership. how children learn, the methodology by which they learn is also one approach practiced in many countries, US, Mexican Academy of Sciences played an excellent role. The vocabulary may be different, but inquiry-based learning by doing little experiments. Not to say memory is not important, it's very important. Mathematics is excellent. And fringe benefits, there are two key fringe benefits to inquiry-based learning. One is women, girls. Studies have shown over and over again, girls engaging in inquiry-based education are far more enthusiastic about what they're learning than in classical, traditional rote memory education. If you have two boys and two girls sitting around a table and doing a little experiment, and they have to develop the outcome, not the outcome, but the interpretation, they will also debate. And the other fringe benefit is it nurtures children, particularly from the poorest families, to be more articulate, because studies again demonstrate that often children from the poorest section of, say, Santiago, Chile, the real example, are inarticulate compared to those from middle and upper class families. What is key is teaching the teachers of the new system to gain their, when you're changing system, their confidence and support for the transformation. And then research-based teaching is used in a number of institutions as a way to educate students using up-to-date or recent advances. And using recent landmark advances stimulates and engages students in learning. And as I mentioned at the beginning, in the last 15 to 20 years, many universities, and certainly not all, have created multi and interdisciplinary programs and curriculum, not just at graduate level, but undergrad. It's not easy. There are challenges by deans who protect their turf and by others, but forging ahead can be very gratifying to all concerned. So I hope I've been able to convey to you what the roles and responsibility, key roles and responsibilities are, especially of industry and university, yes, and government. We didn't talk about different levels, but they also, government at state level or provincial level has their own contribution to make, as well as municipal in a number of cases. And that the path government takes and industry in terms of allocating resources strongly influences the extent of success of their different programs. So those of you who are students here, and there are a number of you, this is not your typical, I don't think, typical lecture in course. I want to strongly encourage you that when you graduate and go out to whatever achieve your aspirational goal, to follow your dream, not only do you succeed, but you influence others on best practices and instill integrity and honesty in everything you do and they do. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Howard. Sin duda ha sido una excelente plática. Tenemos espacio para un par de preguntas. Si hay alguna pregunta, algún comentario que se le quiera presentar al doctor Alper. doctor Menchaca.
Well, thank you much for a very motivating talk. And I was wondering, this is not the first time I listened to your wonderful talk, but in your examples, in the examples you gave, there is this feeling of that your university industry collaboration is completely unbiased towards a national or nationalistic things. Like, I don't know, you said your first example had to do with you as Canadian collaborating with British Petroleum on some development. And then you mentioned Dow Chemical and things like that. No, that's perfectly fine. And these nationalistic values, I guess, are perhaps should not be of any concern. But I guess that is not always true. There are always certain limits. So my question is, well, I'll give you examples. Like there is some kind of medical research that cannot be done in the United States and that can be done in Mexico. And so there are important, I don't know, chemical companies or other people who come and do their research here in Mexico. Now, is that, I don't know, Mexico, to my knowledge, does not have a means to control at the government level for that. And I could imagine other concerns. Of course, that should also be true in Canada. I don't know, there must be certain level of research that that is subject to some level of government supervision. Is there an entity for that? How does that work? Ethical concerns, how does that work?
So, no, that's an excellent question you're raising. And that does exist. It's not the dominating issue. I don't want to overplay it or underestimate it. Let's say, for example, smoking. That that industry, I'll give you a personal example. If they had ever come to me and asked for collaboration, just in terms of my ethical value system, I could not do that. And the same with clinical trials that may violate norms. One has to question. And there are ethics review boards in universities that need to take leadership, and almost always, I won't say always because I know exceptions, do. So yes, there are different players for different sectors. And I just gave one example, clinical trial industry on pharma industry. And then there's your personal value system, which of course, the values that are instilled in me as a person, shaped in good measure by my parents, let's be very honest, and define me, last through your lifetime, unless you have compelling reason otherwise. So in some cases, it's the regulatory framework of government that can play a role. And in some cases, the university needs to play a role, like clinical trials. But I must say that with these caveats, the vast majority of business or industry university relationships can be very beneficial. Both sides. Industry too must learn the constraints of universities. They're there to educate. The role of the university faculty member is to educate the next generation of leaders. I don't mean political leaders, in different fields of endeavor, creating helping producing entrepreneurs. And there are certain things aspects to that that cannot be compromised. So understanding each other's limits and understanding each other's positive opportunities, you can construct excellent relationships. And you know, you made a comment about nationalism. I'm a very proud Canadian, but I also want to gain understanding and gain experience working with the best in the world, irrespective of location, because it'll benefit them, hopefully, and I will learn from it. So, I mean, I can tell you, in my prime as a researcher, I'm not exactly 60 years old anymore, I had about, at one time, my major grant support always came from government, but I still had support from 5 or 6 companies in 5 or 6 countries at the same time. US, Canada, South Africa, UK, Japan, etc. Because you see the advantages to it from your perspective and the other side's perspective as well. So for Mexico, I think choosing wisely and taking advantage of the positive features, it can do several things. Not only increase the ranking in OECD from 29 to, let's say, 15, but more important, inculcate a culture as to the importance of research in industry in Mexico. I think that's very valuable. So I'm talking about benefits to industry. And of course, the professor and the students will gain as well by the research that they do.
Thank you for your lecture. It was amazing. About what are you talking about, the leadership in our own ourselves is important, because as we can, as you said, we can see the other's problem, but many times we don't want to see our problems.
I understand. Yeah, and it's important to always, I mean, this is just a personal way of thinking. It's always important to see the other's point of view and try to understand it and the way they lead and so on. But also to think about yourself and say, stand back. That's not easy, but sit back or stand back and say, what have I accomplished in the last year, 5 years, that I'm pleased about, that has had a positive impact on my life? And what hasn't turned out so well? Why hasn't it turned out so well? How can I do better? And where are there opportunities that are not related to Ivy, where I can make a difference that I never thought possible? I have to tell you, this is going on, so if you need to leave, give me 3 more minutes. One of the boards I serve on, these are volunteer boards, is the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. I don't know if anybody knows this. Jose Antonio knows this. This is a program started in Cape Town, South Africa in 2003 to engage young Africans in science, technology through the vehicle of mathematics, because it's not expensive, mathematics, generally speaking, compared to other fields. Not to say it's just as valuable as anything else, but price is not important. But for Africans, especially in strongly underdeveloped countries, that is important. And that started in Cape Town and was incredibly successful. And subsequently in 2010, started expanding, I call it franchising, expanding to other places, Senegal, Cameroon, Ghana, Tanzania, and this month, Rwanda. If you look at its legacy so far, it's remarkable. Why? Many of the students, this is for students who finish an undergraduate degree. Many of them end up going nowhere, past, who now through this program end up at the top universities if they want to go there for PhD in US or in Canada or in other countries. They may not pursue a career in mathematics at all. They may end up in finance, not as a mathematician, but for others. They may end up at mathematics. Some do epidemiology. Some become even chemists. I've interviewed many of them. 33 or 4% so far women, which is high in the mathematical sense, aiming for 50% in 3 years. So the impact of that program has been phenomenal. And it is not an understatement to say that if it keeps its success at this level, let alone higher, it will make a significant contribution to the transformation of a number of countries in Africa. It is remarkable. The person who leads that, Terry Zimmerman, was an abandoned child in Benin who was educated at home, thought he would never lead elsewhere, and now is running this. And to talk to him is amongst the most inspiring hours that I had first. So he said, I learned if there's an opportunity somewhere that uses some of my skills that I've acquired through education and through earlier experiences, it is the right thing to do, to seize that opportunity and go with it. Don't be afraid of failure. I was mentioning to someone in the audience, probably the best architect in Canada, Douglas Cardinal, who is Aboriginal, half Aboriginal, did the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, did the Canadian Museum of Civilization, one of the top 10 buildings in the world in the last 20 years, according to the best architects, or all the architects. And he gives talks on creativity. And he says, what made me a success was also failing, because it made me think about the past, recent, and devise new way forward to the future using my skills as an architect. So that's my only counsel I can say. But always be proud of what you do. Never let anyone take that.
Thank you very much, Howard. Muchas gracias, Howard. Y con esto concluye el programa del día de hoy. Los invitamos mañana a las 9 de la mañana para iniciar con otra plenaria en el tema de geociencias, medicina, perdón, y después iniciar con las simultáneas, a las cuales yo personalmente los invito a la de ingeniería, por supuesto, que estará muy interesante. Muchas gracias.
Pleasure.